Hello and welcome to Func Prog Sweden. My name is Magnus Sedlacek and I'm the host and organizer of Func Prog Sweden. First, I would like to welcome back all our recurring participants. Welcome back to Func Prog Sweden. And then welcome all new participants to Func Prog Sweden. Func Prog Sweden is the meetup where we explore functional programming languages like Haskell, Rust, Agda, Scala, Erlang, and more. We also explore functional programming concepts and paradigms. And finally, we also explore functional aspects of imperative languages like Java, C++, and Python. Then let's head over to today's agenda. First, there will be a short introduction by me, Magnus. And then we'll head over to the first presentation, Building a Vite plugin for F# by Florian. Florian will explore the synergies between F#, Fable, and Vite to understand the craft bridging diverse ecosystems, the diverse ecosystem to enhance the developer experience. Florian is currently a freelance software craftsman. Then the second presentation will be Introduction to Rock Programming Language by Richard Feldman. Rock is a functional programming language that has fast, friendly, and functional as its slogan. Richard has also promised some live coding during the presentation, so we look forward to that. Then, after the live stream, we'll head over to Discord, and you can ask the presenters questions that are a little bit more elaborate than you can ask in the chat. But first, thank you very much, Vite, for sponsoring the live stream. If you want to know more about Vite, head over to their webpage, otherbeat.com, or check them out in social media. Then the coming schedule for the coming months. 11th of June, we're back with another Func Prog Sweden. Then we'll set dates for August and September and come back with that. And remember, if you want to present or have someone you think you should present, please just contact me, Magnus, either on the Discord server or on Meetup or on social media if you're interested and have some material that you want to come and present at the Func Prog Sweden Meetup. Then, of course, if you want to support the Func Prog Sweden community, you head over to Meetup and join our Meetup group. And make sure to head over to YouTube, where you're looking right now, and make sure to subscribe also to the channel. And of course, you can always join the Discord server, Func Prog Sweden Discord server. You'll find the invite on both the Meetup and on YouTube, where you can meet other people interested in functional programming. If you have questions during the presentations, please just write them in the chat and I will bring them up to the presenters. Also, if you want to get a t-shirt like this, head over to the shop and buy one. We don't make any money on the t-shirts. These are just for fun and promotional of functional programming. With that, let's get started. First presenter, warm welcome, Florian.
Hey.
Hey. Yeah, good. Well, welcome to Func Prog Sweden, Florian.
Thank you. All right. Can I dive in?
We see your presentation.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Not gonna lie, a little nervous, but here goes. Welcome, everyone. My name is Florian, and today I want to talk about a Vite plugin for F#. So this talk is going to be about F#, JavaScript, front-end tooling. Before we dive in, just a little bit about me. I am a Belgian freelancer. I do a lot of my work in open source development these days. I'm part of an organization called G Research, their open source software team. And because of that, for the last 2 years, I've been able to work on a lot of F# open source tooling, going from the compiler to various other development toolings. Think like JetBrains Writer. Their F# tooling is actually open source as well. I contributed a little bit to the Ionite family of projects. And so I'm definitely very interested and very versed in the F# ecosystem. And I'm also a little bit of Fable enthusiast, which brings us to the topic of today. I'm going to cover a lot of things which are very niche, and it's going to be a bit of a deep dive into a lot of stuff. So let's go down the rabbit hole, but start out easy with just a little bit of a glossary and sort of build our way up. First off, I mean, I kind of assume we all know what F# is, but in case somebody's really outside of the .NET space, F# is like the younger sibling of C#. It is functional programming for the .NET runtime. Think of it as the OCaml or Haskell for .NET. But yeah, I mean, F#'s been around for a while, so I don't think there's much need for introduction. I'll be using F# today during some demos, but not really touching a lot on syntax. It's definitely just an ML language in that regard. Then next we have Fable. Fable is a compiler or transpiler that can transform F# source code to other languages. The most popular and starting point was F# to JavaScript. But these days you can also transpile to Python, to PHP, to Rust, and some other languages. But when I talk about Fable today, I really mean like F# to JavaScript, because that sort of ties into the whole Vite story. Then we're going to talk about Vite. Vite is, en français, c'est Vite. So that's like the name of the development server. Vite has a similar sphere to what you may have known from Webpack. They are fundamentally different when it comes to their implementation, but they can both launch like a dev server where you can edit front-end assets like JavaScript, HTML, CSS, do little changes, and then have like an instant browser refresh to reflect what you currently are doing. Vite has a lot of good out-of-the-box standards. So it ships with a bunch of default plugins, and your initial Vite experience is actually quite good in terms of what you're after. The critique of like something like Webpack was that there's a lot of configuration, and you really need to understand the internals about how bundling works. Vite is like a very much nicer way of getting going. And the moment Vite can't, help you with the out-of-the-box experience, you can use plugins to cover all your needs. Okay, so now that I've explained a couple of words, I want to tell you, well, why did I create a plugin in the first place? As I mentioned, Fable transforms F# to JavaScript. So at a certain point, an F# file on disk became a JavaScript file on disk, and then Vite can just pick that up and then kind of rolls with it. So in a certain sense, Vite doesn't really need to know that your F# your JavaScript was once an F# file. So the thing is that can act as a sort of a pipeline, and that's really nice, but at the same time, it's a little clunky. And I kind of want to demonstrate how you would do it today, how you would create a Fable application and then hook it into Vite, and talk a little bit about how that experience looks like. You will need a JavaScript runtime, because that's simply what we'll need for Vite. I'm going to use Bun because I'm a Bun guy, but you totally do not need to use Bun. Most people still use Node or Deno, but just fair warning, I'm going to use Bun today, and I like saying the word Bun. First up, we're going to do bun create Vite to scaffold our Vite application. I'm going to call it my Vite project. There we go. And I'm going to do a little demonstration with React to highlight one of the nicer features. I'm just going to choose JavaScript, and eventually we'll go in and use Fable for that. So first up, let's go my Vite project, open this in VS Code. I need to install my dependencies. This is all very typical front-end stuff. And once I did that, I can do bun run dev, which starts the Vite dev server. If I open that, the browser opens. And this is really a very nice introduction if you've never ever seen this, but this is a React application. So we didn't really cover React, but it's not super important to understand much of React. But in any case, I have a little application. It has a counter. I have a component that's linked to that. And what I can do now is I can edit the layout of this component, save the file, and then it instantly refreshes the browser without doing a full page reload. And you can see that my counter is still intact. So that is really the power and the magic of something called Vite, which is this tooling. Now, it's not the first of its kind, but Vite really pushed for this entire experience, this hot module reload as we see it here, to be part of like an official browser standard. So that's sort of one of the key differences that Vite brought to the table. If I now want to do basically the same thing, but instead of going with a JSX or JavaScript file and use a Fable file, I can start with creating a new .NET application. And I'm not going to lie, I actually need to do a couple of CLI commands to really get going. So I kind of prepared a little script, but I'll go over what I'm actually doing in a bit. So PowerShell, new Fable. It really is just a succession of .NET CLI commands, but we need an F# project. We need the Fable CLI tool. We needed a package for the React binding. So we just needed a couple of things. And when I do a .NET tool list, it shows all the .NET tools I've installed. And one of them is Fable, which we can use to compile the JavaScript. I'm going to use the word compile, where I sometimes actually mean transpile. So depending on how nitpicky you are, I mean, it's the process of putting the F# to Fable. So that's those can be used interchangeably. Cool. So quickly, I scaffolded an FS project because in F# the file order matters. If I have like a bunch of files in this, so imagine I don't have like an extra file, but imagine I had. If I have something in a.fs, then A cannot use any functions that are defined in library because the order in F# matters. You can only use certain functions and records after they have been defined, and that's why you, for one reason, need this fs_proj file instead of just going with like something file-based and importing from a certain file. Now we can use Fable, the .NET tool I just installed, pass it this app_fs_proj. It will look into that and target all the files over here. This library file is empty. I'm just going to scaffold the same code as you would have for the React component. So over here we have like a fragment. It has a div and anchor tag. I just tried and mimic the same thing. There's a fragment, there's a div, there's an anchor tag, and this F# DSL just takes in two lists. So each of these things, which has like an HTML element kind of name, just looks at, takes two lists, the first one for the properties and then the children. So this is, hits very close to what React is doing. And I am going to say that I want the extension of the compiled file to be .jsx. And that's because Vite is, has a way of dealing with JSX files. That's how it really wants the React thing to play out. Now I ran Fable. I have now library JSX, which has a fragment and also JSX syntax. So these things look very similar. When I do bun run dev, I'm starting the web server again. I am now, instead of going to import app from the app.jsx file, let's go one level up and then use the library JSX over here. And then you have this hey from Fable. And if I click on this and update this a little bit, well, it doesn't work because the Fable command was like a one-time thing. So I'll need to split and go to like another terminal, do the .NET Fable app JSX thing again and pass in a watch flag so it keeps watching my files. And once it's done that, we'll have more or less the same experience that I had in my JSX components. So it's starting, it says, hey, from Fable. I change the file and it updates automatically. So that's good, but I'm already a little bit annoyed by the two terminals. There's actually something we can do about that. If I were to stop the Vite dev server, sorry, over here, close that, I can actually run the Fable command again and then pass in a run argument and then go with bun run dev. So for those who have absolutely no idea what the bun run dev does, it just runs the script defined in the package JSON, which then again runs Vite over here. And if I do that, then both are sort of going to work together in the same terminal. So Fable first, and after compilation, it started whatever I passed it over here, and now we have the same effect in one terminal, so to speak. All right. So that is how they would recommend you to do it today. And going back to the slides, I'll have some reservations on it. I'm going to do a little bit of nitpicking. First one is that I think Fable's kind of weird. I don't really know any other tools in this whole Vite ecosystem where I need to start the other tool first and then start Vite. So that just doesn't feel really good to me. When you look at something like Elm, you wouldn't do it that way. There would be an Elm plugin, which sort of foreshadows what I was after. And the other thing is that I'm a consultant, and if I go into a company and they already are using Vite and TypeScript, and I need to explain this whole thing, yeah, but we should use Fable because it's F# and functional and way more cooler, then having to explain this way of doing it will just feel like a step back. So I don't quite, it doesn't quite feel well in terms of what is the rest of the ecosystem doing. And Vite is a lot bigger than our little Fable universe, so it should be the leading case in this. Another thing that really bothers me is that I first need to write the JavaScript to the disk, and then Vite reads it again from the disk. So that feels a little bit unnecessary. If that could be done in memory, I feel that would be more efficient. It's not the memory or the performance thing that really bothers me, but it's just that it could go wrong. Like, what if Fable is still writing to a file, Vite's already reading it, stuff like that. So that's just something I kind of want to avoid. And then lastly, actually forgot to mention this, but if Vite is configured, I want it not to watch my F# file. So there's a little bit of a configuration that you typically need to do. The docs recommend that Vite does not watch your F# files because Fable will watch them itself, and then you end up with like two watchers, which I just don't really like that separation of concern kind of thing. So clearly, these are all definitely nitpicks. Doing this experience, as I just showed you, is still very much enjoyable, and using Fable really is a bliss. So if you've never ever played with it, I definitely recommend it. However, I feel like it could be slightly better, which brings us to the topic of today, the Vite plugin. And without further ado, I'm just going to demonstrate the damn plugin. So going back to VS Code, I can first remove this little bit because now I do want Vite to watch my files. I'll need to install a couple of dependencies. The plugin can also be installed from npm. And I'm also going to install Vite plugin inspect. I'll show that in a little bit later in a demo why that's interesting. And for the Vite plugin Fable, I also add the --trust parameter when installing. What that actually will do is run the post-install script of the Vite plugin Fable. And that's actually very important because this will compile a .NET binary, which the plugin will later use in its run. The --trust thing is a bun thing, and what it ends up doing is that it puts your installed dependency into your trusted dependencies, which again runs the post install of the installed package and thus gives us the binary. I am going to configure these things so I can import inspect from Vite plugin inspect. I can import Fable from Vite plugin Fable, and I'm going to hook these in. So I want Fable first, then do React, and then do the inspect thing. For the Fable for today, we are using JSX, so my JavaScript code still contains JSX, and Fable the plugin needs to know about that to further transpile that. Anyway, if I now remove the library JSX, do a bun run def, you can see that we have a lot more logging going on. The Fable plugin, it currently makes a lot of noise, and right now we get an error because I just removed that file. So if we change that, what we can now do is instead of importing the compiled file on disk, we can just point it to the F# file, and then Vite picks that up, transforms that via Fable because of the plugin, and we actually have the same result. So when I do the counter, I go over here, I were to update or add like some new content. I say, hey, and then, oh, nice, it refreshed, but my counter's gone, so kind of almost makes me look bad, but almost. Before diving in, let's take a look at the inspect endpoint. So because I added the other plugin, I can go to like the inspect over here, and that shows you what happens in every file that was served to the browser. So in this case, all these files went through the Vite pipeline. I go and see for library.fs, the first thing that happened here was it was loaded from disk. That's just by the core plugin of Vite. Then my Fable Vite plugin Vite thing kicked in, took all this source code in F# and transformed it via Fable to JavaScript. You can also see that the JSX is already compiled. That was the little extra flag I needed to set in my configuration of the plugin. And then this import analysis just, well, allows us to see what we're seeing right now. However, there's one thing missing, and this is just your React component. And to have the wonderful fast refresh magic going, it needs to be wrapped again. And luckily, that's just a bit of a configuration. So in that React plugin, I can say include and pass in a regular expression. So I want to say everything that ends on JSX or FS over here. There we go. So counter hey and delete it. Seed count is still 4. So yes, that worked. And then the inspect will add one other transformation, and that's because of that React plugin. It will actually take all of this and wrap it in what we call the fast refresh hot module. So this import meta hot, that's the well, the web standard I talked about that Vite's trying to embrace to make this whole experience work, and the fast refresh runtime. That's really like the React implementation detail to get all this magic up and running. So that was definitely, let's try go back to the slides. That was my demo, and I feel like this is a slightly nicer experience. But the next thing would be, how does this even work? Because, you know, as I mentioned, .NET, Fable uses .NET, so it uses like the F# compiler and all that, and Vite plugins are just JavaScript, so there must be some dark arts involved in to get this up and running. And that is totally the case. The way it works is that during that post-install event of our package, a .NET binary was compiled. I could have just shipped the binaries, but I'm actually shipping the source code. And it compiles a little F# project, which is what I call the daemon, or the sort of language, well, it's not a language server, but sort of server.NET endpoint. And then the plugin from JavaScript communicates to that via JSON RPC. It spins up the process, and that process will have receiving messages via the standard input and then giving responses via the standard output. And that's how I sort of bridge the JavaScript runtime and the .NET runtime. When a Vite plugin is actually a set of callbacks, so when it starts, you can sort of choose in which lifecycle hooks, as it were, are you interested. And that is basically when a certain callback hits, and we need to talk to the server. We send our JSON payload, and the server responds, and then we sort of return and resolve a promise, which then leads us to continuing the Vite pipeline. The plugin system itself is based on a set of callbacks from Rollup. So a Vite plugin is in 90% of the cases also a compatible Rollup plugin, depending on if you have the common set of hooks implemented. In our case, the story starts with build start. That's really like something that runs once at the start. Each plugin gets a chance to hook into what the build start is. That happens after the Vite configuration was sort of resolved. And in our case, we need to detect, okay, where's the F# project? Because that's very important. That contains all the files in the project, and it also has a set of references, and we need like a lot of .NET information to eventually get the compiler arguments. Once we have the F# compiler arguments, we can type check the entire project, give that to Fable, and then Fable will have that typed tree of F# and transform that to JavaScript. We prematurely transpile everything up front and then just send like a dictionary or a map back from the .NET process to the plugin, and like, hey, this is like every F# file path is then translated to its corresponding JavaScript. When the browser is requesting a file from the Vite dev server, it will hit the transform hook. In that transform hook, we did import app from library. It will then detect that library .fs URL. We do a dictionary lookup, return the JavaScript, and that's how it gets to the browser. When we update our F# file, because Vite is going to know that this was now part of our loaded assets, the inspect plugin sort of lists it. And when you change one of these files, the handle hot update hook kicks in. And then we have a chance to talk again to the server, let it know that, hey, this file changed, and maybe one or more files are going to change. Because of that, it kind of has a bit of a ripple effect at times. And then eventually the server replies, we update the dictionary, and then the transform hook will be called again, and everything updates. One last hook is then the watch change, because there are also certain files you want to know if they changed, then we need to invalidate the project. Because when, for example, the F# project file changes, it's pretty much a guarantee that all the files we no longer can rely on the cache, and we need to just reload everything. But that happens more often than you think when you add a NuGet package, which is like the .NET dependency. When you add a new file, you really need to be sure, and that's why we're watching a couple of files, so that we constantly keep the browser up to date. This actually came with a fair set of challenges, and I definitely want to highlight a couple of things because they're a little less known, and it's kind of interesting to break them down. The first one was that we saw Fable is a CLI tool, and I wanted to do things a little bit different with the CLI tool. And I just had to carve out a little bit of the bits and pieces that I'm actually after. What I want from Fable is more or less just an API function that says, hey, for this JavaScript, for this F# and its project and all its settings, I actually want you to return the JavaScript as a string or like a buffer. But there was nothing really out there that does that. It happens inside of the command line tool, but if you can't just pass it and give it the input arguments that I already had. You can start it, and then it will figure out everything on itself. But then, yeah, it always writes to disk. So there's just a lot of things happening inside the CLI tool, which I don't really want. And I can't really just run at one time and get the result. So TLDR is that I just had to go into the code base and try and extract the things that are useful into a separate project. So we could have another library on NuGet. And one of the more challenging things is it wasn't just moving some files and code. It was, it was quite a refactor. And it's one of those things where I am not a Fable maintainer. I happen to know the Fable maintainers, so we talked about it, but it was definitely a big ask. And what I kind of want to highlight is that I feel the only way I got away with this was just by explaining my ideas carefully through some online calls with the maintainers, really, have them believe in the story and, get their blessing to really do this. So I definitely want to thank Maxime in particular. But when you want to do these kind of undertakings in open source, it really helps to sort of call face to face or, well, remotely. The next challenging thing was the JSON RPC. It sounded like a good idea, and it's wonderful when it works, but when it doesn't, it really sucks. So one of the things that you really need to respect is that you just cannot log to the standard output. Fable was constantly logging to the standard output, and I believe that in the part I carved out, it wasn't there yet until it eventually appeared that it was. And that was quite the needle in the hay, because all you get is like, hey, the plugin cannot deserialize the response from the JSON RPC endpoint that it's talking to, and that's all you get. So it took me a while until the penny dropped that, oh, I'm probably messing up my own JSON payload by something that's writing to the standard output. And then I proposed to have, hey, can we not have a logger interface to deal with this? So I had to go into the Fable codebase again, extract everything after an iLogger, which again, the maintainers were okay with. The CLI tool, which you saw earlier in the demo, still just uses a implementation that logs to the console, but then inside of my plugin, I write everything, I keep it all in memory, because I just absolutely cannot write the standard output. And lastly, I want this, never to happen again. Like, it's very easy to, for somebody new contributing something to Fable, very unrelated, but doing one simple test log, and then eventually that gets shipped and can just ruin the communication between the .NET process and the plugin. So I wrote something we call an F# analyzer, which does code analysis of the F# file, and it's going to fail the PR to the Fable build when somebody is trying to log to the standard output and not use the logger interface. So that's something I entered to preserve that it still keeps working. Another fun thing was what happens when multiple files changes. I gave you a very, easy demo, so to speak. I change one file and then that reloads the browser. But what if you rename a function and on the definition side it changes and it's also used in a couple of other files? So all of a sudden, you basically get multiple handle hot update callbacks, and they all need to resolve a promise, and they all need to contact to the server. And if one of those endpoints trigger, you kind of already know that at most one file changes, but in practice, depending on your side of the F# project graph, multiple things could change. So you either, you also don't want to do the same work multiple times, and that's why I try to batch these things via reactive extensions to have a little bit of a buffer window, capture all the calls, and then eventually, if depending on what changed, send a different message to the .NET process, because maybe 2 files just changed, or another good scenario was when you format all the files, then it also went kind of crazy. So it's good to batch these things, and potentially you're also like adding a file, which will definitely trigger a handle hot update hook for the new file you added, but also for the project file. So the project file eventually wins, and then you know that, oh, I need to invalidate everything. So that's where batching was a good strategy. A next thing is that Vite is very popular. We all love it. It works wonderful, and I, would definitely recommend people doing something front end use a tool like Vite. But when it comes to the plugins, it turns out that really not that many people are writing Vite plugins, and it is just difficult to wrap your head around. There is documentation, but you either have to look into the rollup documentation or you don't get like the satisfying answer, because a lot of the documentation explains to you what they expect in the happy path, but doesn't really touch upon what if I know I cannot process the request, but it definitely is my request to process. How do you properly communicate that? Is it okay to throw? Is there a better way of doing it? So those kind of things are definitely tricky. And there are not really that many people in the Vite community that write plugins, and I just don't really have any friends there. So the hard thing about the Vite plugin is that I felt that I had to, develop this on my own because I'm bridging two foreign worlds that usually don't really interact. So the sad part is that I never really had a sparring partner on a call to talk about the Vite specific things. Lastly, I want to talk about what happens inside the .NET process. It's kind of tricky because I told you I cannot log to the standard outputs, and it's kind of tricky to see what really happens inside. I try to do things as straightforward as possible, but it was often misleading when I developed something on my on Ubuntu, like the WSL site, and then tried it on native Windows, and then I had subtle bugs that appeared where I was like, but this was working on Linux, so what's up with that? And he added a little bit of functionality to debug what's happening inside the .NET process. Call it your homebrew gRPC, sorry, not gRPC, telemetry kind of solution. So if I go back to the demo here and I stop it, let me add one environment variable. If I do a bun run dev now, you'll see that it logs I'm starting on 9014. And that actually gives a log of everything that's happening inside of the dev tool, which is also very important. So I get this project change. That's the first endpoint that the build start hook calls. Then it has this response of all the .NET things it needs to know, because unfortunately that's a bit of the reality. .NET needs a lot of information for the F# compiler to kick in. And then eventually I have these logs like, hey, it's type checking, it succeeded, it's going to send this back to the client. When I were to update a file over here, I can see that more logs are being added, so that's kind of nice. And one interesting thing, you can't really see it, but this is a log that's actually coming from Fable itself, so I can reuse the entire iLogger thing. And if I ever need more information about what's happening on the Fable side, I can just opt into that when I contribute some more logs. So that's definitely has been very helpful in terms of figuring out what's really happening. And now I do want to answer a little bit of a question. Should you use this? I feel like it's nice, feel like it's nice tech, but I definitely value honesty and I want to be upfront about a couple of things. Is this whole thing sustainable? Well, it's something you can't really, ask funding for. And yeah, I mean, everything that it touches is free to use. Fable's free, .NET's free, Vite's free. So it feels weird that this becomes like a product. And I also am not using this really in an enterprise context. So I did a lot of F# work, but my recent clients are not using any Fable. So this was really just a pet project. And I can't say like, hey, I use this every day, I know it works. That's not kind of it. I use it for my project, which I tamper with in the weekend. And that's sort of the little bit of a reality there. I also went to FOSDEM this year. FOSDEM is one of the largest open source conferences in Brussels. And I went to see a talk, Take Your Open Source Project from Surviving to Thriving, where the speakers kind of mentioned that you need to have a plan when you're making something for open source, when you're putting it out there and you're sort of like inspiring people like, hey, this is cool tech, maybe use it. There needs to be a little bit more to it, because we see this all of the time. You typically create these things out of passion. You definitely find the energy to prototype that. You're happy. I'm kind of proud of what I did here. So I published this on NPM, like, hey, people can use this. But when I came out of that talk and they were like, yeah, but is this sustainable? Is this really a good idea for businesses to start use? I was like, yeah, shit. I have no plan whatsoever with this. So I have a couple of options, of course. I could maybe hope that this gets adopted by the Fable maintainers and then we move it there. But at the same time, I don't feel good about, putting additional burden on them. They're already, there's not enough manpower to maintain Fable today, so just adding another project of the week doesn't feel right. And purely on a logistic level, if I move it from my local, from my own user GitHub repository to the Fable one, in practice, I just see it dying under a different name. So that doesn't solve anything if there's nobody else ever going to touch it. I could try and build community. I could try and convince existing Fable users to start using this, then try and trick them into maintaining this. And truth be told, that's very difficult. This whole project touches a lot of niche things, which most developers don't really come across quite often. I'm talking about the .NET compiler side, the F# compiler, the Fable compiler, the Vite plugins. It's less done, and it's very hard to find people to really, have meaningful PRs for these kind of projects. It also just sits into a lot of moving dependencies. There will be a new version of Vite. There will be a new version of Fable. There will be a new version of .NET and F#. Will this all keep on working? Maybe, but also definitely maybe not. So yeah, who knows? That's just a little bit of a reality check there, that it just sits in between all these other pieces. So it's hard to say what's going to be the outcome of the code I have right now in, say, a half-year time. And frankly, I have to admit, I'm a little bit out of juice in terms of supporting these kind of things. So yeah, if anybody's interested, this project is really open for adoption. I'm happy to transfer it to anybody that, wants to use this, wants to get the most out of it, and then has, the project's best interests at heart. So please reach out if there's any interest. To answer that question, should you use this? Today, absolutely. It worked fine for me. If your project is not doing is a little bit along the lines of what I had and what I tested, then it will probably work fine for you. If you want to use this for a project that has a longer run, you might not be afraid, need to be afraid to actually fork it and potentially fix something on your own if I don't have the bandwidth to review any PRs or anything. That sounds a little bleak, but it's just a little bit reality. So I don't want to exclude that part and make this sound as a very, oh, definitely use hot new thing kind of story. But that being said, I did write some documentation. So if we quickly glance over this, there's little documentation. How does this work? Technical implications. So it touches a lot of things. How do you configure everything based on what you might have? How does the debugging thing work? So I do very much, I was passionate to really see this through, and I also, because I'm giving this talk, that kind of helps to see it through. And I also gave a Amplifying F# session where we went through the code base. I explained the rationale about certain technical things. And yeah, I feel like it definitely isn't a good place to be adopted. There's not, you can't really have the argument like, I don't know the code base. I did some fair attempts to explain how the code works. If you never heard about Amplifying F#, I definitely want to wrap up with this. It's a new initiative that tries to improve the F# ecosystem. F# is owned by Microsoft, and the F# team does a fantastic job. However, they are very focused to the compiler and to its tooling in Visual Studio. Anything else you use in F# is typically, from the community. And the community needs a little bit more love. That's why we organized online sessions. We have a lot of recordings where we try and explain people how do you contribute to all these complicated projects, going from the compiler to parsers, lexers, LSP, some more other open source projects that are interesting. And we really just want more people to contribute, because we can definitely use the hands. We also gave an F# Essentials course. This was a partnership with Ian Russell, where we tried to explain F# to newcomers. And during a 12-week course, which was free, we had a weekly stream again with Ian, where we just teach people how F# works. So we definitely just want to keep that energy in the F# community. We recently also have an open collective. The TLDR there is that if we get some money, we can do more and good in the F-sharp community. We can just think about sustaining some of the maintainers of these projects. The Fable maintainers are definitely on that short list. So yeah, definitely check that out. We have a website. You'll find all the good content there. And without further ado, that was my talk. I was Florian. Thank you so much for listening. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
Thank you very much, Florian. Thank you. Very nice presentation. Thanks. I wanted to start with, like, before you presented all like the initiatives with F-sharp Amplify, etc. Like, is this the call for more devs and funding for Vite? Then you kind of went through it. But if there people want to reach you, where should they go? Is it like visit your webpage? I think we put the link out on the meetup page. If people, is that the place to contact you?
Yeah, and for the Vite plugin specifically, I would suggest the discussions tab on GitHub to sort of poke me there.
Yeah. Cool. People are sharing in the chat saying very nice presentation. We have one question. It's like, will there ever be a way you can do get out of like, is there a way that F-sharp can do without React, like Elm, without Vite or without Fable, just pure coding? Or
Definitely, but So the short answer is yes, you could possibly do everything in .NET and try and have that same experience.
Mhm.
But on a practical level, the JavaScript community is just so much larger, and they build these fantastic tools like Vite. So I don't know, on a practical level, it feels a little bit you need a lot of hands and a lot of investment to get on the same level as existing things which are out there and which are hype of the day maybe, but they definitely kind of work well. So yeah, it's a trade-off. It's I see in theory no reason why you couldn't have a nice experience with only the .NET. But yeah, it's could take years for full-time work to get to that place while
Yes.
while Vite is just out there. So I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, that was a question. I kind of agree with you. A lot of people are in thanking you for your presentation in the chat. Like, awesome talk, and like I have very positive experience with Fable, which people can recommend. So yeah, thank you again for your presentation. And if people want to ask you more questions, you will join the Discord server later if they want to elaborate more, have more questions, maybe talk to you around joining Vite project, etc. Or other initiatives you had. We'll also post all the links you have to all the places, Florian, so people can find them afterwards also, of course, if they're interested and want to join. Again, thank you
Great,
very
thank
much
you.
for your presentation.